All right, so if I haven't had the pleasure of talking with you yet, Emily, exercise science. So I'm going to give you the abstract that's there is what current research is going on. So I'll talk a little bit about data collection with that. I'm going to lead into it with kind of how I got there and past research, but this is my plug to attend the honors events in both May and December because I had two students that are a part of this research who will be presenting the data with that. So you should attend. So most of my research now involves special populations, specifically working in the Down syndrome population. So my background, we're not going to really go through that for sake of time, but I was at ODU, the University of Tennessee, and then Ohio State, and now I'm back here. So this is, I think, very key to start out with. This is my Aunt Ann. She has Down syndrome. This is my dad's sister. She just recently, a couple months ago, turned 53. So the average life expectancy for someone with Down syndrome is actually 60. In 1983, the average life expectancy was only 25. So we've made a huge change. A lot of that being, there are laws against institutionalizing individuals with Down syndrome. There's way more individual practices. And then on top of that, the science where we've been able to better the quality of life and living. So obviously I am very biased to this population, but I've grown up around people with Down syndrome my whole life. I am heavily involved in the Down Syndrome Association of Central Ohio. I serve on part of some of their boards. So it holds a very dear place in my heart, which is where obviously, I get my motivation for my research. So a little bit of background, people with Down syndrome, 1 in every 600 babies born are born with Down syndrome. It makes it the most common chromosomal disorder. That being said, until it was right before COVID, there was really next to no funding that really went into the area of Down syndrome. It was sadly kind of made the assumption that if we did a lot of genetic testing pre-birth, that many babies who, if parents found out they would grow to have a baby with Down syndrome, there would be abortions instead of, the money was put for a while more into that than what happens when someone is born with Down syndrome and aftercare. And side note, if you know anyone with a baby with Down syndrome or needs resources, I have more than you can possibly imagine for Ohio, so let me know if you do. So as far as there are many prevalence of diseases and disorders for people with Down syndrome. They have a higher prevalence of everything from hypotonia to hypothyroidism, which those are the two that I'm kind of focusing on most, and many other things, congenital heart defects. And so there are a lot of areas of research specific within this population in general. My research has focused in on exercise and Down syndrome. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about a study that we actually just submit for publication this morning. I'll talk about some of those results and very briefly, and if you're interested in that, when we eventually get it published, whether it's this journal or another, I can hand that over to you to read. But when it comes to resistance training, an area of kind of, when I say resistance training, I'm referring to lifting weights, Pilates, yoga, body weight, resistance bands, anything that causes, even water aerobics, anything that causes resistance against the body to increase lean mass is considered in that category. For the longest time, it was pretty much encouraged for anyone who had any disease or disorder of like, we don't know what happens, so don't do it, don't exercise. And now we know it's the complete opposite of that. Whenever we don't exercise, we can see a lot more detrimental impacts. And people with Down syndrome are not immune to that. So we have seen a couple things that are really important going into this. One, there are many studies showing the safety for people with Down syndrome to be able to participate in exercise. So that's first and foremost important, to make sure that we are not causing harm. So that's where we start. And then I'll get into a couple of these other markers here in a second, but I mainly wanted to get to that safety point first. The other thing is the wide variety of people with Down syndrome. Most of what you see maybe on TV or people that are kind of talked about more within the Down syndrome community are really aligning in this very, very mild IQ range. So not extremely severe. But then when you look at the IQ range, the majority of people with Down syndrome fall in that middle. They're not necessarily in the lower end. And so that's something to keep in mind of when it comes to talking about the research behind a lot of this. My last study, the one that we submit this morning, was looking at here. So we did a resistance training intervention and looked at pre-post markers on the fitness, cognitive performance, motor skill, physical or body composition. This data collection was at OSU, so we had a wide range of things at our disposal to test. So we tested pretty much everything pre-post to kind of see what's going on for this individual group. So it was a 10-week intervention looking at specifically resistance training. So we didn't incorporate aerobic exercise into this at all, just we did a lot of weightlifting, which was a lot of fun, I will say. Not going into this just because of obviously time and other reasons, but I have it here just in case people have questions about it. When it comes to resistance training with people with Down syndrome, like anyone else, we want to have a proper warm-up and a proper cool-down. We want to make sure the stretching is a little bit different in this population because the high prevalence of hypotonia, the flexibility is actually higher than Gen Pop, and so we don't do quite as much stretching. And so one thing we found within the study was that we slightly increased flexibility, but the goal was to just kind of keep it the same. And if we increase a little, great. If we even go back a little, that's fine, but we don't want to get increased too much where we could then be hypermobile and cause risk of dislocations and injuries. So we could see that resistance training can also really help in many ways, but not hurt as far as flexibility goes. A couple things, we use much longer rest periods and hydration, and we have to have heart rate monitors during sessions. A lot of these being individuals with Down syndrome have sweat gland abnormalities, which makes it a lot harder to essentially cool down the body during exercise. So that means we need more hydration. We need more rest in between each thing. Seems very minimal, but it can be very impactful to ensure that not only we get great performance during and actually get the benefit, but also then we're not causing any sort of harm to these individuals. So I smile a lot when I look at these pictures because it was so much fun. The motivational factors or intrinsic reward systems or even extrinsic are one of the most key pieces with working with this population. So they got to choose, when they came in with me, I ran all the sessions, so they got to choose what they wanted to listen to. So I have heard Taylor Swift's album 24 times. She became one of my top played on Spotify that year. And then same with The Greatest Showman. That's what got me into that movie. I heard that soundtrack 24 times as well. And so they got to choose the music that they wanted to listen to get you motivated. When it came to the type of exercise, if they found something, if a certain subject found something they really enjoyed over the others, I incorporated that into their lifting session. So we stuck with the same areas of body groups and those sort of things, but when it came to the programs, it was highly individualized to each person to really help with adherence and retention to the program overall, which we did see. We had 100% retention in this program as well, which is that doesn't happen mostly within exercise studies. People get into it and they're like, I don't want to exercise. So we usually get about 20% attrition rate. We did not have that in this. And then obviously patients, families, friends support. This requires a lot of driving, transportation, those sort of things. It does help that I work with the Down Syndrome Association of Central Ohio, so we have this connection, and the parents trust me, and so they know, they feel in good hands kind of allowing their child to participate. And then the other thing I wanted to mention regarding training people with Down syndrome are the cues that we give. So if you're training in a typically developed adult, most of the time you may say, let's say they're doing, a squat. You may say, okay, push your butt back a little bit towards the wall, or squat down a little lower. Those same cues the verbal cues really don't hit the same with people with Down syndrome. There's a disconnect between hearing and doing. So there's a lot of touch cues. For example, there's this green band here. This allowed me to help pull the subject's back, which helped him pull back, which really helped him engage his glutes and his quads, which is what we want. And then as those muscles get stronger, they begin to do that automatically. Same with push-ups, for example. It's a very complex motor skill, so it's very hard for a lot of people to do, let alone individuals that tend to be farther behind within their motor skills. And so it's little things like I have one hand underneath, so they're touching the chest onto my hand, and then I have the other hand up front, head to hand. So we're doing those kind of together, and in conjunction, we can really begin to put these patterns together and formulate and the mapping within those motor skills to then, at that point, once we get the motor skill down, we can get a lot of the strength down. We're going to skip this for now. What we kind of found within this, we saw a huge increase in gross motor skill, and I do highly contribute that to the way that we trained and how we really honed in on training the motor skills before we focused on what weight we were using and those sort of things. So that was huge. And then we saw some improvements in executive function. We saw some changes. We saw quite a bit of changes in muscular endurance, muscular strength, increased lean mass. This one is actually kind of crazy. We saw a really drastic increase in lean mass, more than the average individual or typically developed adult. And we also know there's a little bit of research, a couple articles showing that people with Down syndrome may have elevated levels of creatine, which could potentially contribute to higher lean mass gains. And so there's another, I guess, study in the works there, but some interesting findings there. And then we did see an improvement in mood. Not a huge improvement. There are some issues with some of the measures we use for mood within people with Down syndrome, but the rest of them being pretty significant findings there, big findings. We'll come back to some of these pictures if we have time, if you want to see them there, or afterwards you can just ask me. I have a lot, which is why it took a while to upload my presentation. I'm going to end on this slide and come back to it, but working with people with Down syndrome, I know I'm biased, but is one of the most rewarding things that I think I've ever done. It's probably, it's one of the most rewarding things I do in general. And these are just quotes that we were taking throughout the study of different things people had said to me, parents had said to me. One thing you notice, yes, is feeling better, but we didn't measure self-efficacy, and I, could kick myself for not. Because the biggest thing that we saw were people feeling better about themselves. And in doing so, wanting to do more things for independence, wanting to, there were 2 of the subjects out of the total that were planning that after this, they had enough confidence to plan to move out on their own. And they were physically able to, and parents had been trying to kind of push them there for a while. And there's something about the accomplishment of being able to lift certain things or being able to do these things on your own that push them to really kind of be like, I think I can do that on my own. Both of those 2, I still keep, I see them around and they both still live on their own. And I know it's a lot easier also on their parents to have that as well. So I kind of mentioned that already. This is now what we're starting here at ODU, and this is where some of those honor students I mentioned are coming into play. We have a little bit on the long-term studies, and we also want to see short-term what's happening. So I had mentioned hypothyroidism and how the prevalence is higher with individuals with Down syndrome. There are other endocrine disorders as well, and the adrenocortical function and how that could be diminished. And so we looked at the cortisol levels of baseline and post-exercise. With exercise, you would expect cortisol levels to increase after exercise. There's plenty of research that shows that in a typically developed adult, but there's not much with people with Down syndrome. So we wanted to know, essentially, are people with Down syndrome getting that same benefit from exercise? They're getting that good positive stress from exercise, which then gives us more long-term benefit. And I won't get into too much of the details of what we are finding because, hey, come to the honors talks. But I will say with mood, we're still trying to find kind of valid measures so the things are hit or miss with there. We did just analyze the cortisol for stress for the first cohort, and it's looking good. We see a lot of the same responses we do within typically developed adults, which is great. So they get a lot of the same positive response. And then we haven't analyzed the cognitive performance portion of things just yet, and so that'll be when we get to those honors talks, we'll have it done by then. But we're still in that data collection phase, and I'm not gonna. If you have interest in the methods or anything with what we're doing for here, please ask, and we'll talk about it. So while we have like a few minutes, if you want to ask questions, go ahead. I'm gonna skip back to this slide if you want to read any of those. All right, questions.
Given the variability in IQ scores,
We looked at mild to moderate on the previous, this study, it was mild to moderate. One really big thing with analyzing, I honestly don't know if we would see the same. A lot of times we see a greater magnitude within the physical markers, but I don't think we would see as great a magnitude maybe in the cognitive markers. But one big thing is getting individuals to participate that are lower functioning is much harder to do. A lot of it is there aren't as many valid measures to be able to work with individuals. The one that we used for this, for cognitive performance specifically, has validated measures from all IQ levels, pretty much the whole range. And so that is ideally the one that we would keep using. But anecdotally saying, I have piloted with an individual who has a very, very low IQ. She functions at a level of like a 3 or a 4-year-old, and that test, anecdotally I can say that test didn't work well for her. So I know that's something that even lacks within the field in general for the methods that allow us to, but I'm not sure if we would see, I think we would see similar physical responses. As far as, mood and cognitive changes, I don't know if we would see the same responses for lower functioning people with Down syndrome. Mm-hmm.
More independence? Did you look at pre-post to see if there's any self-regulatory skills that were grown?
I wish we did. No, we did not. That was the biggest thing throughout the study. I was like, oh, we should do an amendment. We should add this in. But no, we didn't. When it comes to the cognitive portion, we focused most on hippocampal function just because that is where the chromosomal disorder impacts the highest. But we did test different facets of each area of cognitive performance because there's very, very minimal research within the Down syndrome community in relation to exercise of how it might impact. So we focused on 2 things. 1, where do people with Down syndrome have the most decrement, and test that area. And then 2, where do typically developed adults tend to have the most benefits cognitive performance-wise, and we tested those kind of areas more than anything else.
I'm glad you didn't include all of those variables because there are more honor students in the pipeline.
They can do other ones. Selfishly, I'm okay with that. This study I pretty much ran single-handedly. I didn't have a life for a long time, so it would be nice to have. It is very nice having those honor students to help me out while we're doing this as well. And I will say that the 2 honor students and 1 other student who's helping as well have all talked about how rewarding the population is in general too. So I know there are a few other people at the university that work in this population, but it's a lot of fun. So I enjoy it, definitely. Anything else? Okay, cool.